The new American economy, this is a bipartisan research and advocacy organization, found that in 2015, 2.3 million refugees earned collectively about $77 billion in household income. They also contributed 21 billion in taxes. So these are pretty remarkable figures. And they left, and that also left them with another 56 billion to spend in our economy, in our country's economy. It's true that there is an investment required to resettle refugees. And our government, in a 2017 study, and I have the references here for anyone that wants to see them, by the National Research, a 2017 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that on average, the government spends about $15,000 per refugee to settle them. Numbers like this often are used, and they worry taxpayers who fear that admitting refugees will be a burden on our economy. But that's not the full picture. The same study found that over a 20-year period, refugees pay back our government 21,000 more than they receive in taxes, in benefits, So their return on the investment is much, much better. And if you take their issue of crime, FBI stats, they track our crime rate. They report a decline in 9 out of 10 communities where refugees are settled. So often the most enduring impact of refugees on our society is completely left out of public discourse. And even the media does not cover. I don't recall an honest conversation on the benefits of having refugees. It's always some problem with refugees. President George Washington said, "The bosom of America is open to receive not only the opulent and respectable strangers, but the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions." So this is in our DNA, and this is what President Obama said, that the basic idea of welcoming immigrants to our shores is central to our way of life. This is what makes us American. It's in our DNA. It's not only a good thing to do. Our founding fathers laid it in our way of life, but it actually is going to help the bottom line. As our nation or population, the native population ages, these immigrants and refugees will make a big difference in extending the life of even something like Social Security. That's so important to us. Thank you, and with that, we welcome Abdi.
Ali Abbasi, thank you very much. Thanks for giving the numbers, because that helps that you set me up for what I'm going to say. Thanks to the Muslim Family Center, Howard County Library. It is lovely to be in Maryland. I don't live here. Basically, I live about 10 hours drive from here, in Maine. And I'm happy to talk about why I ended up in one of the whitest states in the country. I know this is a question that often comes up. Do you all hear me okay? I'll try to speak a little louder, I hope. My voice is usually loud, so I hope that helps. All right, I am going to read a short piece from the book, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of writing the book rather than the story of the book, because I hope that we can engage in a discussion in the last 30 to 35 minutes of this morning's presentation, so that I take your questions. But hopefully, for those of you who haven't read the book, this is one of the authors, every author's job to try to convince you to buy the book and read the book, right? Number one, this book has been out since June 20th, 2018. for those of you who may remember, June 20th is World Refugee Day. Is it also Father's Day? I think it should be Father's Day as well. I guess, I don't know, maybe 21? I never celebrated it, but I think that's what it is. My publisher agreed that the book has to be released on World Refugee Day, and that was a great success. Get it out there. In 2018, and guess who was the president? Not gonna say names. I'm trying to avoid being political, but as you probably know, from some of the reviews that the book has received, from Kirk's review, journalists from New York Times and others, one thing that they all agree is that the story in this book was two things: timely and engaging. Timely because it was a moment that we needed to use the rhetoric to fight the other rhetoric, the words and that were coming from one of the most powerful men in the world, and also some of the leaders in the country. Words that were coming out to dehumanize immigrants and refugees, to attack and call them rabies. What was the other word? Insects. I mean, you go on and on and on. And then on top of that, there was the in 2017. For those of you who remember, there was a travel ban that was imposed and celebrated by our president. But in Maine, which is where I am, while I started working on the book, we actually had a governor who ate it last year. Not even making this up, 2016 and 2017. It's a governor who came to the media and said, Black people are coming to impregnate white women in our state. They're coming and bringing drugs across the border. So what happens when you have a dark skin walking around the streets of Maine, right? You see yourself and you become so visible, right? Because if the leader says something and the media picks it up, and it's on social media, and it's recorded on the radio, and it's on the television, what happens is it spreads like a virus all around the state. And that was a moment when, let's see, for those of you who remember Michael Brown, the young African-American, was murdered in 2014. I believe it was August 11th. So there was such event that happened in the country that actually triggered a lot of emotions. But not only that, it also provoked trauma, panic attacks. And I ended up going to see for a therapist. I'm not making this up. So those are the situations. All right, before I dive into that, let me just read a piece from the book, and I will discuss why they have decided that this book was highly engaging. The part I'm going to read from the book is actually in the epilogue. The book's 16 chapters. I really hope that you read and go through it. And then for those of you who did, you already are here, loaded with questions. I'm very sure of that. And I will give you that moment to trigger and ask your question. All right. I'm going to read, like I said, from the epilogue, page 306. In the 7 years I've arrived in America, I've been on the radio, television, newspapers, and conferences. I was a keynote speaker at several universities and colleges across the nation. I talk often to high school students as well around the state, and I have traveled as far as Nashville to speak at Vanderbilt University. Again, this is 2 years. 2 years, yes. Okay, if I take it off? Thank you. Sure. Well, I hope that works. Every time I tell my story, I'm reminded how lucky I am to be here. Abdi Iftin, a child of war in Mogadishu, with no more formal education than the madrasa, speaking at famous universities right now. I wanted to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Now my idols are my students that I meet. I have enrolled at a university in Maine and plan to eventually study law. And that, I promise, is happening. Someday, also, I hope to stand for a president. Guess where? In Somalia. No one from my clan is yet able to run for Somali president. They're still considered lower class and unfit for the job under the power sharing system set up after independence in 1960. But this clan is large, and there are so many of them, and politics can change. And someday I would like to be Somalia's first president from a minority clan, but I also want to run as a Somali American, not a clan leader, promising peace and justice for all Somalis, regardless of clan. I want to land at Mogadishu airport one day with a heart full of love and ambition for my people. Somalis overseas send $1.4 billion a year to their home country. According to a 2016 World Bank report, this happens through remittance to family members, and this is more than all foreign government aid. But I think we could do more. What if we could spend that money to start schools in Somalia, teaching more than just the Quran? What if we build roads and sanitation systems, hospitals, apartment buildings? Yes, Islamic extremism is currently the greatest roadblock. And Al-Shabaab refers madrasas and giant soldiers to clinics and colleges. And because they thrive on chaos, they love Trump and other politicians around the world who shake the swords at Islam. But radical Muslims do not represent Islam, nor do they represent the hopes and dreams of the Somali people. You can pray to Allah 5 times a day and still hold hands in the movies. This, I know. I know it's possible to savor a camel milk and democracy, and also chase deer across the bush and stop at the red lights you want, and proudly name your nomadic ancestors and dance to hip hop on your own wedding. These are not contradictions or abominations, but reflections of our own universal humanity, and yes, our shrinking world. How else to explain an African boy's love of the Terminator movies or African drumming classes being taught in American high schools? My passion for America was ignited by Arnold Schwarzenegger hiding from militia fighters in Felix's video shack in Mogadishu watching the Terminator dispatch enemies from the motorcycle. I had no idea that my hero was not even born in the United States. Like me, he had a dream to call himself American, since he was a child suffering abuse in his gay dealings with a strict dad. And like me, he had Hollywood movie heroes, including the athlete Johnny Weissmuller, also another poor immigrant of the Tarzan fame. He taught himself English and made sure he was always ready when good luck came his way. But of course, no one had any clue he would one day become a governor of California. Now I can see why so many ways this poor boy from war-torn Austria was like the poor boy from violent Mogadishu. When Arnold was born right after World War II, many people thought that the countries of Europe were incapable of democracy. The same is said today about African nations. It took time and support of America, but finally many of those European nations, including Germany itself, became beacons of freedom and tolerance. And I hope that holds. But more importantly, I hope that my own example reminds people of what's possible. No one gets to choose when or where to be born, but what happens after that is what you can imagine. Do you agree? All right, that's the end of the reading. Now, should we start with my selected title?
Are you going to talk about your book at all?
Yes.
You're going to tell your story?
Am I going to tell my story?
Yeah.
That is what I'm doing right now. Do you hear me okay?
Born in Mogadishu?
I'm sorry?
You were born in Mogadishu.
In Mogadishu, yes, yes,
You're going to talk about that.
yes. Well, the book is 360 pages, so I can't go through all of it. But I just read from the epilogue, and that is just a tiny part of the book. But the book's 16 chapters. I warn you that the first 5 chapters are difficult. And that's why this book has to be made into a young adult version. At least take some things out and soften up a little bit of the story. But it's a difficult story. Story of survival, resilience, and determination. And I think one message you come across this book as you read and finish is that, number one, the most resilient, the most determined human beings on earth always find a way. And that relates to exactly what Ali was talking about in terms of migration refugees. Often, they do not talk about that part of the story. What did these people do to get here? But it becomes that we often focus on, oh, they're here, and we can't have them in our country. We have to push them back and send them back, and then the politicians forget the basics, right? The causes, the journeys that these people have taken. And I had to write this book, and the idea of writing this book basically came together in 2015. And I'll tell you a very short story. 2015, we still had Obama as our president, and I was really, really lucky to get into this country months before he left office. So I got an email from a representative of the United Nations General Assembly in 2015, and the theme, the main topic that they were talking about at the time was refugee and migration. So they wanted the voices of refugees. They wanted to have representation of people who have refugee stories. And I got that email, and I was invited as part of 7 people, alongside with a Yemeni, a Syrian, an Afghan, and I believe a Libyan, and maybe Iraqis, and one more person. So I jumped in a train, I went to New York City, 9 hours of ride, and I put together my notes. When I got to New York, number one, the hotel was $500 one night. Crazy, right? And this is the first time I'm really getting myself into such expensive. Everything okay? Oh, I know. I forget that there's something going on. I apologize for the people watching us on virtually. I'll make sure that I'm here. I'm getting closer to just give you my a little louder. But yes, so that's what happened. I got into a very expensive place, hotel, and I came out and I totally forgot to put on my suit. So I was just walking around in my jeans, and I came up to the headquarters, New York, United Nations. I was told, no, you're not gonna walk in here looking like that. So you have to go put on some suit. So I caught up with a friend of mine, Mark, and I said, well, I actually left. I didn't bring that, so what can we do? And so I borrowed. I'm not embarrassed to tell you this story. It just adds up to why the book comes together, right? So I went through security check, went up to this high-level meeting, and they asked me to speak for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. And then the notes that I have were more than that, like 30, 40 minutes. I said, I have no idea how I'm going to shrink that 5 minutes. So at least can you give me 10 minutes? And they were very strict in that. They said, well, we cannot add. It's limited. You go on, and then the next person goes on, and then that's it. Right? So I went ahead and I tried my best to squeeze this story in 5 minutes, and I walked away, and there was a lot of applause, great, thanks for telling your story. And you sit down, and then we went up to lunch, and I think 5 of us, we probably ate, the bill was over $700. So in total, my mind was going crazy. Like, okay, what are we doing? What's the end goal of this meeting? The end goal of this meeting was to raise funds so that refugees scattered all over the world has to get help. Now, let's think about it, the numbers. In 2015, the total number of refugees slash displaced was less than 60 million. Now, 2021, October 16, I guess today, the number is near 100 million. So what has happened? How much of those storytelling and fundraising did help? The migration, the refugee displacement is skyrocketing. Countries are falling. Wars are beginning, right? Things are going worse. Now, think about it. When that happens, when the numbers are really higher, that means there is more people that are on their way seeking what? Not only better life, not only economically stable places and stuff like that. They're saving their own lives. They're fleeing not only from persecution, but climate change. And who's causing climate change? I believe we're number one. Maybe China is number two, but I believe we as a country are contributing so much to the world climate crisis, right? That's one thing. Now let's come back. In where I come from, in Somalia, the United States is flying drones every single minute, and I was told that in every week there is at least 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 bombs that these drones are dropping, hitting some neighborhoods and families and stuff like that. And each bomb costs over $40,000. So if you add, there's so much money that's going into destroying countries that have been going through war themselves for like 30 years. What is the threat? That's coming from Somalia. That the United States has breaked out of. I really can't understand. So if you drop a bomb and you're killing someone's uncle, mother or father, what happens is the kids are on their way. They don't want to get killed by machines that they cannot see. They're invisible, flying over the clouds, right? So they're leaving their countries, crossing the desert or the ocean, or even sometimes borders illegally, trying to find a safe place. So the story included in this book goes through that. Well, okay, so that's the difficult part of the story. Now let's come back to the human part of the story, because every single story has a human side, right? It's not about the horrors, the death, and the destruction. I'm very disappointed in Hollywood's representation of the world that Hollywood doesn't know anything about. Let's talk about Somalia for a second. There's 2 movies I recommend that you watch, and if you have already done so, I'm happy to discuss why those stories are not a true representation of what Somalia looks like. Number 1 is a movie made in 2001. It's called Black Hawk Down. So Black Hawk Down is about American Marines going to Somalia in the name of restoration of hope and distribution of humanitarian assistance, right? And they get into trouble with a warlord. American Marines leave. There's 18 soldiers get killed, but thousands of Somalis don't die. All right, now Hollywood comes together and says, like, this is a hero story. Our army goes in, so let's make a movie out of it. Let's hire Nigerians to look like Somalis. Let's shoot the movie in Morocco because we cannot go to Somalia. Now the movie comes out, and I remember going with my friends, like, it's a movie about Somalia, let's go watch, right? And we watch, and it's the city that I grew up and I don't recognize anyone. So that actually is dehumanizing stories of people. It's not about the military strife. It's not about conflict that these movies represent. Now, what comes to your mind, and I'm really curious, like for the majority of the Americans, what comes to your mind when you hear Afghanistan, or Somalia, or Rwanda, or Congo? What comes to your mind? You're probably thinking about people who are waking up, poor. There's a phrase that I like to use, poverty porn. You know what that phrase is? So poverty porn is how the media represents stuff. It's like New York Times bringing an image of a mother crying, tears in her eyes, and there's a child that she's dragging. Those are like the capturing moments. These are what these people look like. No, it's much better than that. I'm not ignoring, I'm not denying, I'm not saying those do not exist. They do exist. But why don't you talk about that moment when I dated a young girl in Somalia when I was 15 years old, and we walked to the beach, we hang out, or maybe how I learned English by watching movies, or maybe when I played soccer, right? Do you ever hear that story? You do not hear that story. Well, like every other child, We have dreams and ambitions. We do those stuff. So I included the stories of my childhood, not only losing my sister to farming and losing friends to the war, but also living the happiest moments of my life within the destruction, within the war. What are some of those moments? Family, relationship, and friendship. So as you read the book, you come to, I think, your image gangs and this Mogadishu that was nicknamed, for example, the Valley of Death, the most dangerous city. These are the nicknames that the world gave us. And up until now, I think they called us the most corrupt place. I mean, there are names that they give us, right? But as you read the book, I think your perception changes. You come across these stories where you would say, "Oh, that's interesting." Just like our children, actually, the Somali children also like to play games. They select what they want. They're hard learners. They go study. They love their families. They do not give up. When things are not together, when they lose their house, they don't just throw themselves off a building and commit suicide. They work. They believe in a future, right? And when those children grow up, surviving through all of that, and they come at the border at your door knocking and saying, "Hey, I want you to look back and see my story and actually think how much I can bring into this country." That is not happening, unfortunately. We're treating people like, remember the thousands of Haitians the other day under the bridge? If you watch CNN or other television, you just see them as like numbers. Ali and I were talking about the Kenyan wildebeest yesterday. Does anybody watch nature? So the Kenyan wildebeest is like, you know what a wildebeest is? It looks like a buffalo. There's a migration season where thousands and thousands, probably millions of them, cross through the open land into the river, and there's crocodiles in the river. And for those lucky ones, just make it across, right? But when you're looking at it, you're looking at it as a number. The humans, we're not really supposed to look at them as a number. I'm not interested in knowing how many hundreds, how many thousands of them are there. I am interested in knowing what in the world would force someone to take this dangerous journey, crossing dangerous places like country after country, sometimes even swimming across the lake, across the dangerous lakes, dangerous rivers, only to come right here, right this moment, where they feel like, "Hey, I have a 7-month-old baby." It's like, how in the world did you really do that? How did you cross, across this dangerous place? Well, that's one thing. The other thing is, I think our American media tries to represent that the whole world's refugees are coming to the United States. Fake. That's not true. 99.9% of the world's refugees are not even anywhere near the United States border. They're in Turkey, they're in Pakistan, they're in Kenya, they're in Ethiopia, they're scattered all over the world. The tiny little bit that come to our country, because our media is bringing their image and their stories in a different way, that it scares Americans who don't understand these people. It freaks you out. It makes you feel like the world is invading. So remember the words that they use? They're invading, their invasion. Ted Cruz goes to the border. What does he say? It's crisis. The whole world's right here. And I think, unfortunately, I hate to be political, but I think that's ignorance. So when you have a refugee story and you're watching the politicians say something, and you're watching the image that is presented, you cannot do anything else but just sit there and shake your head. Now, what do I do to combat this type of thing? Write a book, get on TED Talk, which I did both, write op-eds to the Washington Post and New York Times. There are some that I already did that you can look up. So to me, I take charge. I'm not sitting around and saying, "Hey, I made it. I'm right here. My family is still back there and going through the war." But that doesn't mean they're giving up hope. They're still always hopeful. My mother says, "If I'm alive in the next 10 years and if I see you, that will be the golden ticket." And I say the same thing back to her. We're basically separated. There's no way that I really feel like it's safer now to go back. And for her to come here, it's a long way. It probably will not happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, I really hope that you read the book. You will have lots of questions. I'm very sure about that. Um, and I hope it brings your world closer to sort of like understanding these refugee stories. Again, this is one person's story. There are millions. And let's also remember that not two refugees have the same story. So with that, I'm really happy to receive books before they're even published from my publisher, Random House, or in other words, Knopf. They sent me advanced copies that a young Rwandan refugee is working on, and I read those stories. And myself, someone who has never visited that part of Africa, I just have my eyebrows raised all the time as I'm going through this. This is wow, surviving the 1994 Hutu and Tutsi genocide, and then going through other struggles. And now, a young man's story that I just finished reading, his most intense, I think, part of the story was like, how do I get this published when I know I'm going to be killed for saying this thing? And my advice to him was just go ahead and do it. So was it easy for me to publish this book? Like, did I really make it? Did I say, I'm saved, I got out, like Americans do when you're trapped in a war and you come out and you come here and you're all over the media and so like, because I'm out now, my family's safe, so I can talk about whatever I want, right? No, my mother disagreed strongly that I published this book. She said, well, as long as we're here, don't do that because you're bringing so much danger to our lives. And so I wrote an email to my publisher and I said, I give up. I'm not interested in publishing this book right now. So I will talk to you maybe sometime when my family is out in the safe world. That's what I did. And I, just set it aside. And then my brother called, and he was still in Kenya as a refugee. And he said, I just talked to mom. Have you given up on writing the book? I said, yes, I have. She made me cry and so much stuff. He said, don't do that. Just go ahead and publish it. And he and I had this argument back and forth. I'm like, I really want to do that, but I'm not sure how much danger this will be to our mom. And he said, it's time. You don't do it now. I don't know when else it's approaching. We will try to be fine. One way or another, where mom is, she's in the hands of God. Nothing you can do will protect her. Right? She'll be safe. If God saves, inshallah. If her time comes, she's going to depart. And that was so soothing to me as someone of faith. And I believe my brother and I am so happy to have him next to me, on my side. So I hope you know what I mean by that. There's always that one person who shows you the right way. And from day one, when the war started, as I was 5 years old, it was actually my brother who's been supportive. And now I can talk a little bit about where he is. It's not in the book. So my brother's name is Hassan. He was rejected migrating to the United States under the tribal ban. Trump's State Department sent emails to like hundreds of thousands of refugees, including my brother. And the email said, hey, your case is closed. That's what it said. 13 years of going back and forth with the US Embassy. My brother finally, just one single day, got 1 minute in a one paragraph email that does not explain anything that he received from the State Department that said, case closed, don't even try. That has shattered his life, completely devastated. And I was not sure what else to do, but just sit there and worry. So I jumped into action. I connected with Canadians. I sent at least 25 copies of my book across the border to Canada. I was trying to encourage some Canadian group to actually come together and sponsor my book. And they did. So good news is he's in Toronto. Bad news is I haven't seen him since January 2019. and he's been there for a little over a year now. I saw him the first day that he came. I wasn't a citizen yet, but now that I became citizen, the border has been closed. I hear some good news now that the border is open, so I'm probably thinking about putting some gas in my car and hitting the road. It's about 10 hours drive. So ladies and gentlemen, that is my discussion. Now let's turn into questions. Yes, go ahead.
Abdi, thank you so much for these wonderful presentations and your stories of resilience. And I think, just so that she can hear me probably, I have actually a comment and a question. When Americans look at refugees, do they look with guilt or do they look with pity? And the question really is, and that's very important for us to think, are we creating more refugees or are we rescuing more refugees, right? So there's a book called Dying for Growth, who's dying and who's growing, right? And the people who are growing and the people who are dying are completely different things. I highly encourage you. It's a very academic book, so it's difficult to read. But the truth of the matter is, for our growth in this country, we are actually usurping resources and creating wars everywhere else. So instead of really feeling pity on the refugees coming in, we actually should feel responsibility for them. Right. I'm a refugee myself, so that's why. The second issue is I have worked with a lot of resettlements with the refugees here. And to be honest, they have an uphill battle to survive in this country as a refugee. It's an uphill battle. Hopefully, do you think you have it easier, or do you think your brother may have it easier in Canada? Because we are actually not a very welcoming country to refugees. Can you elaborate on that?
That's a very good point. Thank you for that comment. I strongly agree that two things that you just said. Number one, it's an uphill battle. Number two, we should be responsible. Now, let's talk about is America making more refugees, or is America protecting more refugees? Again, this is my understanding according to the numbers and wherever we are in the world, we're creating more refugees, right? Through several ways. I mean, there's the climate issue that's actually happening. Why do we even have military bases all over the world? Right? How does that help? I don't even understand when we're trying to say that we don't even have resources for the people who are in this country. Well, here's the one thing. Several years of reading books and sort of like studying America and how they see the world, I come to the conclusion of one thing. I think, and you might disagree or agree with me, I think every American citizen, except for the refugees, every single American born in this country, at one point have to play themselves in the shoes of refugees. For example, just try to migrate from the United States to somewhere else without credit card, right? Without a vehicle, without support of your family. Just try to go and survive. And then Americans will understand how hard that is. You and I came to this country. We were not born in this country. Did you actually have a bank account when you landed here? No, you did not. Did I have a bank account when I landed here? Did I have $1 saved for a future? No, I did not. Did my mother and my father support me? Did they say, hey, we're gonna fund you, just do whatever. Let's know if you get into trouble. Did they do that? No, it was the opposite. They actually said, the moment you land and find a job, whatever you do, taxi driving or hotel cleaning, just try to remember and send money, back to us. I really think if the Americans try to take that place, they're gonna find out how incredibly difficult it is. Not to even mention the language, right? Because some of us don't speak the language very well when we come here. So it's an uphill battle in terms of like studying and learning the language and surviving. But that isn't it an amazing thing to find ourselves in better places in a few years? Because I think majority of the refugees bring their skills and experiences to this country. If it is opening a restaurant and running a pizza place or a little sandwich place, or even if it means running a car wash, right? Or if it's something else that you can do, and there are trillions of these stories that you can find in the United States. So nobody's coming here to lay down and collect money from the government. And that rhetoric that's coming from part of this country is really sad. One other thing I would like to add before I take the other question. Refugees are not freaked out when they come to this country. They're not. Americans are. Have you noticed that when inflation happens or something happens in this country, that some of the folks are like, what am I supposed to do? You know, what if I lose all the money that I have in a bank account? I'm gonna kill myself. I'm gonna kill my family. I'm gonna burn this house. Refugees don't do that. They always believe in a better future, right? If something goes, at some point it will. We're gonna slide down into some inflation or recession. You never know. We're gonna run out of money. It's the refugees, I believe. You might agree or disagree with me again, that we will always stand strong and lift our heads up to say it's always a better day. And we're not freaked out. How many of the refugees actually have a savings account for themselves? I think it's not that many. What we get goes to our family. We're connected, we support each other. If there's a member of this community who's actually struggling with rent or job or health issues, we come together. Where I live in Maine, the communities don't do that. It's just individual, it's just a family thing. They lock their doors, they have a little pumpkin sitting at the door. When you have to visit them, you have to call their house, like, can I come? Whereas we actually are a little bit more open than that. Just look at how we live in apartment neighborhoods. I usually go to my Somali friends. I don't even give them a call. I don't even knock at the door. I just walk through it and serve myself at the kitchen. And it's fine. Do that to an American house, uninvited guests. What are you doing? Should I call 911? Right? So there are those struggles as well. And I hope that those things, the love, friendship, appreciation, respect that we bring, I hope Americans learn. And I think it really is good for the communities. Americans are more isolated. They don't know that, but we're not. So we're bringing a little bit of more change here. I mean, we're showing them how to love your neighbor, how to love your friend. We're not, withdrawing ourselves. And I hope the sense of community is something that we're proud of, that we bring to the country. All right. Which one should I go with? I wish I was a moderator. Yes. Okay, so did I understand correctly? Is the question, yes, the refugees are leaving and stuff like that. So what is the recommendation to not to have people stay there?
No.
Right. Okay. So for those who didn't hear you, I'm trying to repeat the question, which is gentleman's asking, yes, refugees are increasing, but what are the recommendations for those type of things to avoid those type of things like this explosion of people leaving? Well, number one, I think it's a human nature to move around. I think it's one of the fundamental freedom that God gave us, right? Our Prophet Muhammad has moved from a place to place. And I think Americans also do that. Hey, I'm from Texas, but I live in Maryland. What does it mean? To me, it's just the same as migrating from Iraq to Syria, from Syria to the United States. I don't see any difference. It's our nature to move around wherever you feel comfortable. So the movement of migration will never end. It will continue. However, the major contributor of displacement is bad leadership. Look at every country in the world right now that has the largest refugees, the leadership is pretty bad. It's corrupt. It's stealing from its own people, and so when that happens and you're a young man, you do not want to be trapped in that. You want to leave and find yourself a better place, don't you? But if you actually have a community where you're happy with, connecting with your family, and things are good, stable, nobody wants to leave their country. I would have never left Somalia if there was no war. It's a beautiful country, longest coast in Africa. Who wants to leave that, right? And I would be, and I know I live in the United States now for 7 years, but I have a dream of building a house in Somalia rather than here in the United States. And I'm sure some of you are actually thinking the same way. Because what's so better to wake up if you're from a Muslim background with the adhan, right? That call to prayer. Those are the things that we grew up with. It's like what we're connected. That's how we see us as a family or a community. So that is actually what I think. I don't think refugees movements might not end. It's a different story when you say people are moving, crossing borders, bringing their kids because they're being chased by some bad folks. Well, that's so unfortunate, but that's how bad it can become sometimes in certain countries. And the United States should take part, rebuilding or contributing to peace building in those countries. All right, 3 hands. The gentleman in the way. Yes.
It's a couple of comments and question. To answer your question, how do you get rid of the refugee crisis? So people don't want to move. This is the beginning of time that your inequities is, we've got great job with the magic wand to get rid of the discrepancy, the economic disparities, and weakness. So it's a very fundamental thing.
Right.
I think the point of thank you for sharing your story, because what this does is, I think the most important for all of us here is awareness. Any one of us, but the different struggles. You, as your story, your struggle with a refugee, and what is portrayed in the U.S., and including me. I mean, I've spent most of my life here. That you get swayed by what the media is. But the important point that you alluded to earlier in your talk, and which Ali also mentioned, was that America hosts only a very small population of people. I think that's very important to get across in the media and repeat it over and over again. So we as Americans understand that majority of countries are harboring, not majority, a lot of countries are harboring millions of refugees, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Afghanistan, spilling over to Pakistan or Syria or Turkey, not that they're welcoming with open hands, but out of necessity, conditions of inconsent like just spill over. People migrating from Libya across the Mediterranean, drowning, children drowning. Seeing those pictures with a child washed up to the shore, drowned. So, your point, why would a 7-month-old child or baby with a parent cross the river to knock on the door of the country that was going to get in? So it's the desperation. But I think the key here is to make aware of whoever comes here that the country's not being invaded. It's important as in other countries, this refugee crisis is economic, it's climate. And your story is a band-aid. You made it throughout, right? It's a band-aid for you as an individual, but the larger problem of millions of refugees, people from this is an amazing scene when the troops in Afghanistan were keeping some of the privacy in this country, people coming on the window or the wings of the plane is on. Right. I'm desperate. Right. So I think this is the key of what you're doing is amazing. But it is overall for all of us. Be aware of this. And from 60 million to 100 million refugee issues not going away. Just putting these findings back in the
I just wanted to
U.S. population investing in all. So I would like to build a home.
Yeah, you were talking about why have to grow in all that money. Unfortunately, the war is big business. Some people very so I guess if Americans would take off blinders and kind of find out, dig a little deeper and find out history of countries and motivations and stuff, they can be much more sympathetic and understanding of what other groups of people struggle with. Is why travel is so important. But I guess because of the fact that we do have a lot of coming here now, this will give us an opportunity to find out about other people and what they struggle with. So I'm glad you wrote this book. But the question I really had was, one, would you still like to be president of Somalia? And two, what was your understanding of marginalized people and people of color in the United States prior to coming here? And how has that changed now that you're here?
So those are really two good questions. Number one, am I still willing or want to become the president of Somalia, like I just read from the book? And the other question is, how did I see marginalized communities or Americans in this country, pretty much people of color, right? African Americans, like what was my understanding towards the African Americans? The first one is yes, not sure when that will happen. So I'm waiting for the right time. It could be the next 10 years. So the second, I grew up watching and listening to Tupac, Biggie Small. For those of you who know, it's like hip hop was part of African culture, created here, invented by the African Americans, and somehow really goes back to the African culture. And somehow we felt like something came back to us that belonged to the continent of Africa. And seeing Black folks within the media and music gave me a sense of belonging. At least that was my perception. Did I know about the struggles of the civil rights movement, for example? Did I know that history? No, I did not. Have I read anything about Frederick Douglass? Did I know anything about what happened in the 1960s? No, I did not. Right? I was not exposed to that. But I think when I got here to the United States, it's when the true stories of like played like film in front of me. Hey, you have to know that you belong in a box, and that box has its own history. You're Black, so you fall into this box of Black, minority, African American. That's where you belong. And that's where I found myself, just in the middle of. And that means now you have to re-identify yourself. I am no longer a Somalian. There's no way we can remove ourselves. No, I'm not, I'm not part of the minority struggle here. Even though the African Americans have experienced 400 plus years of what? Slavery. Well, slavery and iniquity and injustice and all the rest. So, like, how much of that do you belong? And how much of that are you disconnected from? There's definitely a difference between African Africans and the African Americans. The only difference is African Americans have lost trace, I think predominantly, to Africa. Whereas we still speak the native language in Africa, and that we fly back and we go back and visit our families, moms there, dads there, the rest. But we are part of whatever happens in this country to the minority community. If there's injustice, if there's iniquity, if there's all kinds of stereotypes towards these folks, marginalized communities, we actually belong. Sometimes I feel like we go to the bottom because of other identities. You could be a Muslim from a country, and you could be Black, right? And you could also be like, for example, let's talk about the travel ban. When the travel ban came, African Americans were not included, but African Africans were included. Not only that, but I feel like Somali, Muslim, African asylum seeker, refugee, like all the things that you're made of, that you identify with, have actually become the enemy of the United States, right? At least according to the press. So yeah, it could be that we are here. We might not have experienced the difficulties, but we also actually belong. We're part of the marginalized community. Does that make any sense? Thank you. Walaikum salam.
What I wanted to say is, really have this issue and on one hand, many experts have said that colonialism have been replaced by this new system of managing the leadership. Okay? So before you had sending white folks to these countries to colonize, to get resources from them, to enslaved people in Africa themselves, right? But that has changed. You cannot have that anymore, right? What did they do when they gave these countries independence? Is that they had their own pockets to follow. I hate to say that. Not everybody. There were so many regions that fought against colonialism. But by and large, there were a number of people who they worked with workers. And that system just was significant to boost these countries. Where you have leaders that are completely down than before, where you have one leader, two leaders, that you just order them to obey. And it's cheaper, you have more liability, and people are blaming these leaders for these purposes. It happens to you, right? And even when the democratically elected, in case of most Egypt, you didn't feel good about it, right? You didn't feel good about it. Not myself, but that's the government will come to the government, right? You immediately get back because of what they did, right? So the refugee issue is going to get worse and worse and worse. Why? Because of climate crisis. We have the United States climate crisis. I have colleagues that I work with at the National Institute of that have research institutes in New Orleans. They all have been moving out of this country, some of them here, Texas and elsewhere. So we're going to see a lot of that stuff, right? All this fire, whatever, droughts, flooding, whatever is going to happen. That is going to happen in this country. Instead of figuring out how to just mitigate this, existential threat of climate crisis, which is real. We need to believe that. Universe. It's going to increase this. My question is, how do we address it? You ask me, the low-hanging fruit is to get those foreigners out of those countries and the influence they have in this country, get rid of them, and let the people in this country settle this. That is the best way. As long as we have refugees and now Middle East convictions left the countries, part of that now is joint forces with the Europeans, this rest of the countries, whether it's the UAE or Qatar or other countries, this is horrific. I remember when my family used to go to Iraq for jobs, for education, go to Yemen for education, all kinds of stuff. Syria, not to mention, one of the best places in the world at that time. Where are they now? know it, and it's, I spoke and speak multiple times, and still becomes also down to this, that it is, you cannot talk about how they can, how it is actually, yes, you need things to be, you can't talk about it at the same time. The root cause of it, this will not be the topic, but just let's say the lack of doubt, people will speak it, they will speak it.
That's right.
They will speak it, people will stand, and the director, you know, what's his name, big director, how could you not even pick two Somalis? Somali will speak, to say,
Yes, indeed. Strongly agree.
Yeah. Thank you, Abdi, for your good presentation. It's really good. You're doing a good job. I'm also from Somalia. Can you tell us a little bit how you chose this title of the American? That's just my question.
Very good. What's your name?
Ahmed.
Ahmed. Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Ahmed. I'm my brother. Totally lost. I forgot your name. Oh, another Ahmed. Okay, Ahmed. Well, and I know who's Somali, so it's our instinct, right? You can easily pick. Yes. Him. Over there. Yeah. That's a really good question. I know. Call me back. So I chose this out of 5 other titles. And as you probably, it's like, how do you define America? Like, how do you really define? It goes back to what we were talking about, refugees coming here, stuff like that. Number one, the word America does not belong to the United States. We all agree that, right? Latin America is America. And there's this dispute or conversation going on, like, why do you have to call yourself America? So when you hear America, everybody's thinking about this northern part, right? Next to Canada, next to Mexico. Well, in my when I thought about it, I thought this fits very well if I actually redefine. And again, don't judge the book by its cover. Like, call me American doesn't really mean, hey, I want to be American, right? Or I am an American, like American. When I wrote this book, I was not American citizen, but I was still American by heart. It's something that I thought of because we all dream. We have the ambition at the beginning. 15 years old, I actually remember watching a lot of action films, right? As I was reading from Arnold and Van Damme and all of that, you probably did too. So what comes to your mind is this is an idea. America is this idea that brings us all together. And now we're sitting in this room. And I don't think, well, I do think that at least we speak 5, 6 different languages right here. And that's America, right? It's the idea that brings us all together, using it as an umbrella. And that's how I actually selected my story. The second thing is, I used to have a nickname, by the way, when I was little. My friends called me American. And those two things came together, and I was like, this is the perfect title for it. Call me American. And then I know there's a hashtag going on Twitter, call me American. If you look at it, you might come across some Trump supporters or other folks with tattoos saying, let's not call each other ethnicity, color, or whatnot. Call me American, call us American. But guess what? If they read this, yeah, I hope they get it. Thank you, Ahmed. Should we take one last question, or what do you think? Yes, this one.
he was saying this is going to be the longest year. We want to go back there. Going there, see how lovely people are, how welcome they are, sense of belonging, all of that made them really want to go back and stay there longer time, long time, one month. And unfortunately, there was some explosion, so Mogadishu, we could not go there. But they still have beautiful there, ocean, and his older brother, who was at that time, said, really wanted to go there, even with all of that commotion going on. They felt it was more beautiful than the northern part that we went to. So I agree with you. I'm going to really go to the north, see the people, the culture, and we will never have this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. That's amazing. I would like to add one more thing. I believe you and I have not been lucky enough to see Somalia as beautiful as it was, because you probably, I don't ever remember driving from Mogadishu to Afgoi to all the way to Balagwini and other areas, right? I mean, the war happened and things got really messy. So now when I drive across border from here, from Maryland to Virginia or from Maine to Boston, what comes to my mind is I would like to do this back where I come from. It will happen someday. But for the moment, like my brother was emphasizing, it's just that there is the real people are not running the country. It's that we have these that leadership, right, that are either connected with whatever they're connected with, right? They are doing that for their own interests, for their own power. And then what happens is 99.9% of the peaceful people, like your family and my family, and everybody else's family, we're the ones who are trapped. I'm just waiting for that one day, putting our faith in that one day that will come at some point. But I promise you, when Somalia really becomes peaceful, where you can drive across the country from Hargeisa to Mogadishu, I'm going back. Road trip. That would be the best road trip ever. Thank you.
No, seeing this driving.
Oh, does he drive one hand and look at the other?
I'll go.
And thank you so much, Abdi.
Yeah.
Abdi is an always signing book.